Hey, if you're a Black Sabbath fan, this video is for you. And I'm not talking about a fair weather Black Sabbath fan that likes some of the music. I'm talking about somebody that actually is interested in the family tree aspect of it a little bit and how it ties into Deep Purple. What I have here is an interview with Ian Gillan that was given right at the time he was joining Black Sabbath. And it has some really kind of interesting thoughts that he has about the experience. And then I have another article that talks about the reality of what it was like touring once they'd made that change. And that article is really short, but there's some interesting stuff in it. And as you understand the history of it, Ozzy had been in the band for a long time. He got kicked out of the band, and then Ronnie James Dio comes in, does the album Heaven and Hell, does the album Mob Rules, and they do a live album. And then I think it was the end of 1982, Ronnie James Dio leaves. And then there's this question, what are we going to do? I mean, they almost broke up before Dio joined, and then they had this revitalization and they figured out and they started moving. Well, then he leaves, and then more than even before, they're thinking, do we really want to carry on with this? And then they got Ian Gillan from Deep Purple to join the band, and they put out one album. And here's my copy of it. It's Born Again. I remember when I first saw this album cover, it freaked me out a little bit. I was, a young teenager at the time, and it was like, oh my gosh, it's kind of, but the older I've gotten, the more you kind of look at it and go, I don't know, it seems like maybe that cover was phoned in a little bit. But I don't know, it's a little creepy, a little strange. So anyway, the Black Sabbath Born Again, this is the only one to feature Ian Gillan. If you look on the back here, you'll see the Tony Iommi, Geezer Butler. There's Ian Gillan right there. And then there's Bill Ward. And the interesting thing about having Bill Ward here is that, as you know, the last studio album that Black Sabbath had with Ronnie James Dio, which was Mob Rules, Bill Ward was gone. They had I don't know how he pronounces his name, Vinny Appice. Carmine Appice pronounces his that way, but I don't know. Anyway, get those mixed up on how they pronounce them. But anyway, Bill Ward was back for this album, and this was really the last time we would see, for all intents and purposes, the last time we were going to see him. And he was kind of just disappeared. And actually, Geezer Butler, he disappeared for about a decade too. So we just didn't see these guys around much. And then the last time when they got together for their final tour, of course, they had the three of the originals. They had Tony, Geezer, and Ozzy. Anyway, this album had a lot of mixed reviews. I mean, some people thought it was really terrible. I wasn't really knocked over by it, but there are some cool things on it, and especially the song, for me, Zero the Hero. I have to admit, I really, really like that song. So anyway, that's this. Came out in 1983. And then, of course, Ian Gillan left after this, and they reformed Deep Purple, put out Perfect Strangers. We have other videos on that on this channel. So let me show you this article. I think you're going to find this really interesting. And those of you that are actually watching this, you can see the article there on the screen. And there's actually a picture. There he is, Ian Gillan, the man. And it says, Ian Gillan of Black Sabbath, on why heavy metal rock is still popular. And then it's in quotes, I could make something up, but the truth is, I have no idea. Ian Gillan with a little honesty there. So this was printed in the Chicago Tribune. This was Friday, November 18th, 1983. And the title of this article is Gillan Gives the Lowdown on Black Sabbath's Hijinks. Okay, here we go. When the call came from Black Sabbath offering him a job as lead vocalist, Ian Gillan didn't exactly jump at the chance to work with the veteran heavy metal band. Quote, I wasn't really interested at first, says the singer, who appears with the group at 8 p.m. Friday at the Pavilion. And interestingly, see how much the tickets are there? $12.50. Is that amazing? Thinking about that? Man. Okay. Then he finishes, I had this image of Sabbath as not being interested in contemporary music. It seemed a name from the past. Some music fans might have put Gillan in the same category. A one-time member of million-selling British rock band Deep Purple, he left that lineup in 1973 to form his own band, Gillan. In the decade that followed, the singer and songwriter more or less dropped out of sight in the United States and his native Britain. Quote, "It was very hard for me in my own country around 1975 when the whole punk and new wave music thing was happening," he says. "If you were connected with any band that had been around prior to that, you were automatically despised. But I kept working. I've been singing for 22 years now, and sometimes I've been successful and sometimes I haven't. But it hasn't altered my enjoyment of the music. Between 1975 and 1982, I did 200 concerts every year, playing in places like Portugal, Spain, Greece, Japan, and India." First of all, I had no idea. I found that really, really fascinating that during those years, 75 to 82, because he really, obviously wasn't in Black Sabbath during that time, wasn't in Deep Purple during that time, and yet he's playing 200 concerts a year. And then you see where he's playing them. Japan, India, anyway, it's pretty fascinating, but he was, that guy was working hard. And I mean, to be honest, I was too young back then to be paying attention, but I don't know that I just had no idea that he was working so hard during that time. Maybe some of you did. And actually, I'm actually curious, anybody watching this video, if you followed his solo career during that period, if you had any idea what he was doing. Because I know we have a lot of people that watch these videos that are in that age range that you would have been listening to music in the 70s and perhaps would have been following Ian Gillan. Just curious to hear about that. He also recorded 11 albums, some of which were bestsellers in Europe. Quote, "The audiences were always there," Gillan says. "It built up to where we were playing 20,000 seat halls. But toward the end of the last year, the magic wasn't happening anymore, and I knew that it was time to do something fresh. So I decided to take a long break, and that's what I was doing when I got the call from Sabbath. I was going to tell them no, but my manager suggested I meet them, so I would know what I was turning down. A few hours and numerous drinks after meeting Sabbath bassist Geezer Butler and guitarist Tony Iommi, Gillan had changed his mind about the job. Quote, "I had no idea whether their music had changed, to be quite honest," says Gillan, who hadn't listened to a Sabbath album since 1970. "But the chemistry between us was there, and to me, that's always the first consideration. We had quite a long meeting and got pretty drunk toward the end, but in the beginning, when everyone was lucid, I was really impressed with Tony and Geezer. They're determined and vibrant, and they really believe in what they're doing." Although most critics have reviled Black Sabbath from the beginning, citing the group's ponderous, headbanging style and pseudo-mystical approach, the band has remained one of the more popular heavy metal attractions for 15 years. Quote, "I don't know what the appeal is," says Gillan, who succeeds Ronnie James Dio as Sabbath's frontman. And then it puts in parentheses, Dio, like his predecessor Ozzy Osbourne, left Sabbath for a solo career. The parting was less than amicable. And it's pretty interesting when you listen to Dio tell the story and Tony tell the story, because they kind of have different views on what happened when Dio left. Anyway, but anyway, it doesn't matter. Dio left, started a solo band, and here's Ian Gillan. Continues his quote, "I could make up some story, but the truth is I have no idea. I do think there's a great similarity between the way we approach things and the way real people on the street think, but I don't analyze it. I just like to sing, and I fit right in musically with Sabbath." And okay, by the way, interestingly, and I had never heard this for some reason, but on one of the other videos that we did, somebody had put a comment about Ian Gillan singing the song Black Sabbath. As you know, that's the first song on Black Sabbath's first album, is the song Black Sabbath. "What is this that stands before me?" You know that tune. There's a recording of Ian Gillan singing that song, and somebody had mentioned it. I, for some reason, had never heard it. And somebody had mentioned in one of the comments, and I went and listened to it, and he said that the way he did it was better than anybody's. And I got to tell you something. I don't know if it was better than Ozzy's version, but man, The way Gillan approaches the song Black Sabbath, that live recording, you can find it on YouTube. It's I have to admit, it's pretty cool. It's pretty good. Because I love Ian Gillan. I mean, he's got, and he, I thought on this album, at least on the song Zero the Hero, but even a few others, he did bring it. He did sound pretty good. Okay, while recording their current album, Born Again, the rebirth brought about by new members, Gillan and drummer Bev Bevan, on loan from Electric Light Orchestra, the quartet's penchant for boyish hijinks reached fever pitch thanks to a load of stage explosives and special effects devices left over from the last tour. By the way, if you read Tony Iommi's autobiography, he talks about setting Bill Ward on fire. They were pyromaniacs for some reason. It was very strange. But anyway, I remember being in a pub somewhere in a village about 8 miles away from the studio. All of a sudden, there was this huge explosion. Everyone thought that a plane had crashed, but I knew exactly what was going on. The guys were just having some fun back at the studio, which is really, anyway, kind of funny. That's the end of that article. So that's Gillan giving the lowdown on Black Sabbath's hijinks. I honestly, when I read that article, I thought it was so cool just hearing what he had to say about it. And I learned a couple of interesting things in there, a little behind the scenes stuff. So now I'm going to jump over to is this other article. And this one is called Black Sabbath's Music Getting Gray. And this was printed in the Atlantic Constitution about 3 months after that last one. What was that last one? Was in about 4 months. This was in February of 1984. And I thought this was kind of interesting. This just kind of put the whole thing in perspective, at least what was happening with Black Sabbath from a success or lack of success standpoint at this point. You know this, if you know anything about them, they'd lost their way. And even though they kind of gained their way back and were finding their way back with Dio, like they really discovered something there, losing him, if you know the story, they floundered around for a long, long time. And it was just a mess for a long time there. Okay. So here's the article. Quote, "I ain't doing nothing," snarled the security man at the door when asked why he was patting down people entering the Black Sabbath Night Ranger concert at the Fox Theater. He was looking for bottles and flasks. The fans were looking for rock and roll. Neither found exactly much of what they sought Monday night. Headliner Black Sabbath, an original heavy metal band that shows signs of running down, and Night Ranger, a 3-year-old San Francisco band that's moving up, were compatible only because the Californians helped the Britons sell tickets. Now that's pretty interesting. First of all, putting these two on the bill together, I don't know, kind of an interesting combination or something. They're so different as far as the music that they're doing. And Night Ranger, as I said, was pretty new at the time. Anyway, opening up for this kind of new version of Black Sabbath as they go on this tour. So even so, the show originally, now this is the part that really got me. And it kind of put the whole thing in perspective of what was going on in reality with the world of Black Sabbath at this point. So listen to this. Even so, the show, originally scheduled for the 16,000-seat Omni, before being moved to the 4,000-seat Fox, drew only a few more than 2,000 fans, many of whom weren't much older than 13-year-old Black Sabbath. That's a bad sign. When you're scheduled for a 16,000-seat arena, and in the end, you barely pull in just over 2,000 people. It was like, again, as I said, this was a rough time for this band. The older fans were hardcore Black Sabbath devotees. They hung around after Night Ranger, a hard-rocking 5-man band featuring lead guitarist Brad Gillis and Jeff Watson, ended a well-received set with its minor hit, "You Can Still Rock in America." Now there's an interesting thing here too, and if you know these stories, you'll already know this. But Brad Gillis, who is here opening up for Black Sabbath with Ian Gillan as a singer, had appeared not long before this on Ozzy Osbourne's live album, where all he did was Black Sabbath covers. So speak of the devil. And so it just kind of a strange twist to put those two things together there. Anyway, Brad Gillis, there he is, opening up now for Black Sabbath when he had been playing a whole bunch of Black Sabbath songs live with Ozzy just a year or so earlier than this. Okay, what they got from Black Sabbath, a four-man band whose only original members are guitarist Tony Iommi and bassist Terry Butler. That is his name, by the way, if you didn't know. It's Terrence or Terry Butler, although everybody calls him Geezer. Was mostly archaic heavy metal rock and a light show that made sunglasses necessary and not just cool. Ian Gillan, Black Sabbath's black-maned vocalist, delivered old songs such as Children of the Grave and new songs such as Disturbing the Priest, which is an okay song. That's on the Born Again album. In a shrill style that won him an A in hair tossing, a B in air guitar playing, and a deficiency in everything else. And he does shriek on this album, to say the least. Because he does have that. I think it was Tony Iommi that actually made that comment that his shriek is legendary, and he does that on this album. And so, and I tell you, one of the reasons that I struggled with the album the first time I heard it is I thought the mastering was done so poorly that it made his voice almost hard to listen to for me. The whole thing sounded a little tinny. So anyway, that's neither here nor there, I guess. Black Sabbath is louder than a jumbo jet. The trouble is it just doesn't get out of hearing range as fast because it's truly a lumbering dinosaur of a band that hasn't evolved into what the majority of today's rock fans want to hear. The contrast was marked, and it's one that isn't wasted on Night Ranger. And then here's a quote. The halls aren't filling up like we thought they would, says Ranger vocalist Jack Blades, but we wanted to get out and work, and we're getting exposure in some good markets. And he could have added, they also are benefiting from the comparison with Sabbath. And I'm assuming what they mean there is that they're new and Sabbath isn't, and they have a new sound, and they're benefiting from looking like the new hotshots, I guess. But Night Ranger was... I actually liked Night Ranger. I'll have to do a video on them once. I got their first album when it came out, the Dawn Patrol, and I thought they were a cool band. I've always liked them. But anyway, those connections there I think are pretty fascinating. So anyway, I think I thought those two articles were pretty interesting, pretty telling, and were a really good overview of the reality of what was going on at the time. Listening to what Ian Gillan had to say about the situation, and if you listen to Tony Iommi's autobiography, which I highly recommend, it's so interesting. He talks about this period, and he talks about the relationship that they had with Ian Gillan during this period, that there was this I think it was Tony Iommi's, it might have been Geezer Butler's. I think they both cover this period though, but it was this weird, they had this really, really kind of weird, distant relationship when they were working on the album. But anyway, some of the stuff was cool. A lot of people criticize it and don't care much for it and think they'd really lost their way at that point. I don't think it was that bad. Like I said, the song Zero the Hero, actually, I'll go out of my way to listen to that. I like that tune. All right, anyway, I hope you liked that video. I hope you enjoyed this stuff. Please follow the channel, like the video. And if you saw Black Sabbath during this period when Ian Gillan was singing, and it doesn't sound like a lot of people did, I would love to get your feedback on that and hear what that was like, because there was actually a live concert filmed. Matter of fact, the first time I heard Zero the Hero, I didn't buy the album when it first came out. The first time I heard it was on something like Rock and Roll Tonight or something like that, and they sang the song Zero the Hero, and that's when I thought, oh, that's a cool tune. And then it made me actually interested in buying the record after that. And if you saw them during that period, I'd be fascinated to hear what it was like seeing Black Sabbath during that part of the Black Sabbath history. All right, anyway, with that, have yourself a fantastic day.